total, my first meal, I was scared.
This society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me.
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
I'm going to schedule so I went to the garage. I've got an ex.
Shh. I closed my eyes.
Suspicious activity.
I was crying so hard. And all of a sudden, he was there.
It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
I am a human being and a killed human being.
Dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.
83 people are murdered every day in South Africa, but here is the terrifying truth. The most dangerous offenders don't look like monsters at all. They look just like you. Tonight, we are breaking the movie myths, asking all the questions that you've always wanted to ask of our forensic psychologist extraordinaire, former head of the forensic psychology section at SAPS, Gerard Labuschagne, and we'll be starting with why your gut instinct might be your biggest weakness. I'm Paul Llewellyn. This is Profiler Africa. Before we get into the mind of a predator, shall we say hello to Gerard? There he is.
Hello, everybody. Good morning from Vancouver.
Good evening to Mr. Gerard Labuschagne. Gerard, we'd like to welcome everyone in the live chat. Super chats are open and welcome. If you want to support the channel, you can become a member. You can buy me a coffee. Let's put that up. There we go. There we go. You can buy me a coffee. You can just scan there. Or you can subscribe. All the links are below. We definitely want you to subscribe. It's free. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell. You'll be reminded when we're posting new episodes. Gerard, I'll be back with you in a sec. I just want to say one more thing. We're also running a BackaBuddy campaign. The link is below in the chat. And it's connected to an episode we posted called The Case of the Missing Crime Shows. The episode explains, using public court filings and our stated position, why several long-form crime documentaries disappeared from the channel last year and why they're not now back. We're trying to raise funds for court proceedings. You can check everything out in the video. The link is below. And then if you'd like to support us with the BackaBuddy campaign, you're welcome to do so. Okay, right. Now that that's done, Gerard, how's it going? I've been spending the last week doing a lot of watching the Olympics. I gather this is the first time you're in a country for the Winter Olympics that is really like totally into the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, Canadians are big on snow, obviously. So I've just been watching what's popped up into my YouTube feed, and there's been some interesting things happening with the Winter Olympics, and some Canadians seem to be doing pretty well. So that's really great for them. Yeah, and I had a long weekend, so this is my first day back at work. So since Friday.
Oh, okay, great. Is it like, are Canadians into these there? Like, it must be a big deal. I mean, winter sports are what Canadians do.
Yeah, look, for them, obviously the biggest one, I would say, where they have their biggest hopefuls would be the hockey, because I mean, ice hockey Canadians. I mean, that's a huge rivalry between them and the US, of course, more so now politically, and them and the Russians. So that's I think the big one. But then, of course, they've got a lot of people doing snowboarding, skiing, etc. So yeah.
I've been trying to get into ice hockey, because everything about ice hockey, you think, competitive, nice and a mild amount of violence and aggression, you know what I mean? But it's just a bunch of guys skating around, apparently hitting a little thing that I can't see. I don't know. They skate around,
and then all of a sudden, a lot of beat each other up.
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's got all the right ingredients, but I just can't. To me, it's just a bunch of guys skating around. It's like, why you make the puck a bit bigger? Can't you have the puck this big? Like a soccer ball size puck,
anyway.
So you can see it. Anyway,
and
guys.
Melissa pointed out, then the sport of curling has had some huge controversy. That's that one where they had that big stone thing and they slide it along the ice, and there's guys with little brushes brushing it, which seems to be the most boring of all Olympic sports. But apparently there's been like some big drama with people swearing at each other and people allegedly double tapping the stone, and that wasn't involving the Canadians. I think the controversy was the Finns, and escapes me now. fins and somebody else.
Did you watch what he was doing? Did you watch what the guy was doing with the double touch? Do you have a?
No, I must say I wouldn't want to watch curling under any circumstances. But
it's not too bad, actually. It's not too bad. But anyway, before we slip in, we're kind of turning it. Before we slip into being a sports show, which is fine as well. I mean, we could do that. But tonight, what we're going to be doing is just answering. Apparently, I'm a bit soft, am I? I don't know why. Let me try jacking the volume a little here. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that's better. Normally, I mean, talking too softly is one thing I'm very, very rarely accused of. I wish I could change that sometimes. Anyway, tonight we are answering all of the questions that you've always wanted to ask a profiler. So we're going to kind of go back over some of the stuff that we cover in episodes, but really like the big questions, and some of the kind of right up to some of the latest thinking in the forensic psychology field, etc., etc. If you have any questions that you've been itching to ask Gerard, please post them in the group. Hopefully I'm not so soft anymore. Let me know if you can hear me nicely.
Carol says you're perfect.
Try to get it right for this live, but there's so many little bugs that can come in. Fortunately, I always get to fix the audio nicely for the repeat. So it's generally only the live where these little gremlins tend to sneak in. Okay, so yes, don't forget to press the like button, hit subscribe if you haven't. So questions we're going to be asking tonight. All the questions you've always wanted to ask. We're going to start off, Gerard, with a simple one, and that is simply: can you actually recognize a serial killer in everyday life? Are there warning signs? Are there identifiers that we could learn that would enable us to pick a serial killer out if we sat down next to one on the bus to work?
The simple answer to that is no. Previously, people did speak about this thing called the McDonald triad, which was fire setting, bedwetting, and torture and harm of animals. And that kind of general theory that people do that are going to end up committing violent acts later on in life has kind of been discredited. So we don't really talk about the McDonald triad in the sort of modern psychological scientific world anymore. And just the reality is no, because we just don't see that nice consistent pattern that that all serial murderers do, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in their development. They behave this way at high school, this way early adulthood, this way later on. They then do this, and they slowly commit further worse crimes. We don't have that. Some have absolutely normal, boring upbringings, raised by both parents, no trouble at school, did average, got out there, had relationships, and then do this. And then other ones, like Stuart Wilkin, on the other hand of the spectrum, really did have this horrific upbringing, abused, serially abused as a child by the caregivers at the boarding schools or the reform schools he was at, et cetera, et cetera. But the majority of them don't have that. And then we get a lot of people who have these horrible backgrounds and become perfectly upstanding citizens in the country. So no, there's no clear pathway that gives us warning signs to saying somebody's going to become a serial murderer. So even if you do have a kid who is engaging in extreme bullying at primary school and high school beyond the norm, is torturing animals, is being sexually inappropriate with people, that doesn't mean they're going to become a serial murderer. I mean, it's not good, and you should definitely, hey, this kid needs some intervention, because we do want to deviate him off whatever path he's on. But we could not say that that's a serial murder pathway because of the stuff we're seeing in his background. But of course, I mean, if you have a kid who is writing out fantasies that he wants to kill a bunch of people, I would definitely take that seriously and get this person in front of a professional. I mean, I remember once assessing a kid. He must have been about 16, and he had everything from fantasies about killing his family and he stayed on a farm, so he planned it out. He would take the hunting rifle, wait for them to pull up in the driveway and shoot them. He had rape, murder fantasies, how he would, on the farm roads, he would sort of kind of like get hit by a car, sort of step in front of a car and get mildly hit by the car would stop, and they would help him into the back of the car, going to take him to the hospital, and then he would strangle the person and then rape the person. He also had, and we know this is confirmed, because he stayed on a farm, they would slaughter cattle, and he'd actually cut out the vagina of one of the cattle and then kept it in his cupboard and would basically have sex with this vagina. And we know this to be true because that was discovered by the family. So he had this litany of problematic thoughts and fantasies. Absolutely want this kid in front of someone professional, getting guidance, etc. But that I couldn't even say he's going to become a serial murderer from that. But it's obviously concerning warning behaviors in general are something we want people to step in and look at professionally.
How did you come across this matter?
Well, that particular case is quite interesting. So one day, the father of this young boy, now his parents were divorced. So the father lived in, I won't say which town, and the mother lived up in the Limpopo province with a new husband. And he'd been visiting dad, and it looked like he had stolen some money. He'd asked for some money to buy a Farmer's Weekly. Oh, that's the other thing. He was interested in sex with animals. So he wanted to buy a Farmer's Weekly. The father said no. And then he took the money out of the father's wallet, and the father discovered this. So the father was bringing him to the police station, wanting to just give him a big fright about his bad behavior, thinking that it's the stealing of the money. So he goes to the police station, and a friend of mine who's a really amazing detective who'd been trained by us kind of gets called to the charge office and says, here's a dad, and the dad wants us to lock the son in the cells for like an hour or two. So, my friend said, look, we can't do that, but let me have a talk with this kid. So Ostrey sat down and started to have a chat with this guy. And, why did you take the money? And he said, Uncle Oom, that's not my biggest issue. And he started to tell Strace about all the things that I've told you about now. And then Strace called me in to interview this guy. There was also allegations, possibility that he'd molested his younger sister. And so I did this interview, got all this information out. It was the most phenomenally interesting interview. Besides the Boberg interview, this was probably the most phenomenal interview I've ever had in my life with a kid in terms of fantasies and a young kid who hadn't done these things yet. And then it kind of obviously gave feedback to the father and the stepmother and said, this kid needs to be under some professional help. He had been at Best Copies for a little bit, had been taken out by the mother who said, no, she doesn't want him there. So there's, just a lot of mismanagement of this kid. And that's how I came across it. But there wasn't a crime that we could force this kid into some kind of professional help. And I've always been very curious. And this was probably 12, 13, 14 years ago. And I've always wondered what happened to this kid. Did he ever get arrested? We had no reason to track him. Just gave our warnings to the family.
Well, fascinating. Marlene asked the question, how can you spot young offenders and what can a teacher do if they see warning signs? I might expand on that a little. There seems to be this conversation happening in the States. I've seen a couple of YouTube programs this week talking about it. This whole idea of kind of pre-crime, how do you identify potential criminals prior to them committing an act, especially, kind of monitoring people's online presence and their online behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Any comments on that as far as kind of advancements that might be, again, sounds like a good intervention, this kid being brought to the right authorities to be able to speak to professionals. That seems like a good idea.
Yeah. So look, when we generally do a violence risk assessment, we're looking at things like violent attitudes that support the use of violence, evidence that the person's preoccupied with violence. But of course, we also look at things like, is there substance abuse issues? Is this person connected to a pro-social group of people? In other words, does he have a good friendship crowd? Is he involved in sports? Is he involved in church groups or activities that are positive? Or is he does he have nobody? Or is he hanging around with the wrong crowd who supports antisocial attitudes and behaviors, crime, etc.? So attitudes, substances, relationships, whatever else. Obviously, mental health concerns are never helpful. Personality disorder problems, which is difficult with young people because we don't typically want to make a diagnosis of like someone's a psychopath or having a personality disorder pre-18. Usually that's too young. The personality can still change a lot. So we usually say, are we seeing signs of that? Then we kind of do a comprehensive assessment, and then we say, what's the pathway that it looks like this kid could be on, this trajectory, based on what he's done, the thoughts. So obviously, if we have an interview with the person, that's great and helpful. But we're not per se trying to say, is this guy a serial killer? Is he going to be a murderer? We're saying this kid is on a pathway where it's not a good pathway because of these risk factors, and we need to intervene. That intervention might be with psychologists, it might be a medication, it might be just chatting, hooking him up with a good pastor who can work with him, or just making sure he's getting involved in a positive friendship crowd, keeping tabs with him. Of course, things like what people are posting on social media are great insights into a lot of the things that I'm talking about. We'll have people posting on social media stuff that's clearly someone who has paranoid delusions, and it's very easy to pick it up. But we'll have people also posting their views on crime, like, if they watch I love Dexter, I really wish I could be like Dexter. Well, that's a bit concerning. Is he tagging and posting, like we had, for example, in Canada about a week ago, a school shooting in Tumbler Ridge, which is in the province I stay in, but a bit further north. It's a smaller sort of mining community. Does someone tag that and say, I really relate to this person and what they did, or I want to be like this person, or I want to be more than Columbine? So absolutely, your social media is very often the place we first pick up that there's issues. In the school environment, of course, you want to see is there changes in behavior. Is this kid withdrawing from whatever people that he used to hang out with? Is this kid's sort of marks going down on a downward spiral in terms of his grades or his marks? Is he going from a 50, 60% down to a 40%? All of those are just generally warning signs that we might have a kid who's in distress. Might not be anything to do with violence, but this kid has issues that we want to intervene, because we also don't want a kid to do badly at school where he has the potential to do very well in the past. So we want to pick up warning signs that tell us there's someone in distress. What the outcome of that distress could be anything from suicidal behavior to a kid dropping out, to, of course, violent acts, punching, kicking, slapping, and in the worst case scenario, murder. So we're really trying to pick up kids who are showing that they're having struggles, and then looking at it and figure out what does this kid need.
Great. I'm going to jump into our next question. We'll get to some of the chat stuff in a second, just because there's a bunch of stuff I want to get through, and we're going to go for about an hour tonight. Yes, sure.
Could I just say, sorry,
Yeah.
I just want to say, if people want to know a bit more about, school, dealing with violent behavior in schools, I did quite an interesting 1.5 hour talk shop, workshop, webinar about a year or two ago when we had that shooting in Johannesburg of that, is it Primrose Primary School, where the principal got shot. And that, if you go on to the African Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, AFATAP, we have it as an open, publicly accessible webinar. We posted it that anybody can watch it. And so you can go there. Otherwise, if you Google Gerard Labuschagne school violence, you might be able to find it. But if you go on to www.afatap.africa, you should be able to find that workshop there. That gives I think, a nice talk about picking up violent behavior in schools and what we should be doing about it.
I will put that link in the description after the show, so you'll be able to click on it there after the show. So great. Just say some hellos to some folks. From Sammy, hey, appreciate all the hard work. The videos keep getting better and better. Love from Cape Town. I just wanted to address a point here, because it comes up a couple of times in the chat, is that people will be like, wow, watch this other show and it's so much, things are getting so much better. I just want to underline that, what we're trying to do here with the channel is bring a little variety. So if you want to join us on the Tuesday when we're doing the live chat for a little bit of a looser conversation about crime, about killers, about all of the bad things in the world, topical stuff and historical, then that's what this program is for. But then we're also, as you are aware, we've produced some other crime formats over the years, and we're also rolling those out as we go as well. So those are a little bit more produced, took a little bit longer to make, maybe look a little bit cleaner and nicer. But the idea is that variety is the spice of life, and you can come to Profiler for a couple of different, for a variety of content as we evolve. And then we've got folks all over the place watching, from Breezy, Bolito. Apparently it's hot tonight in Cape Town. I am going to, before I continue with questions, I'm going to ask my next question. And that is simply, we call our show Profiler. And we have discussed in the very, I think in the first or second episode, we really unpacked what profiling is, what a profiler is. That was a number of years ago now. But what exactly is profiling, Gerard? And what are some of, where does it fit into the kind of current universe of law enforcement? How handy a tool is it still? How has it evolved from the basics right up to kind of where it fits in today? Give us the headlines.
Yeah. So there's no one strict definition. It's not like a protected term like psychologist is or psychotherapy is. It has, sort of a consensus definition. But in essence, really, a profiler is someone who is helping law enforcement deal with usually violent crime, which obviously would include sexual crimes, to understand the crime scene, to understand potentially who the suspect would be. That's its strictest sense of the word and how it originally started. And it really started focusing on weird crimes. I mean, if you have a robbery, homicide, I mean, that's, hijacking of a vehicle, you don't need a profiler for that. A guy who's worked on lots of hijackings would know what kind of suspect we're looking for, might know the syndicates that are doing these types of things, etc. But he really started out dealing with weird crimes, things that didn't make sense. The stuff that we talk about on this show, really weird type of stuff, where the detectives would look at it and go, there's something bigger to this crime. This isn't the normal motives. Who can help me understand why this has happened, and therefore help me catch the criminal better or faster? And that's really where it stemmed from, helping understand weird crimes. Why would people do such strange things? Having this additional insight into human behavior when it comes to violent, unusual kinds of crimes. It kind of expanded over the years, if you look in the law enforcement world, to also start to look at, threat assessment. You have stalking behavior. So a lot of profilers who are doing the ICIAF training program will get trained in threat assessment, which is kind of what I do full time now. So that's also an area that profilers tend to give commentary on. Threats have been made to someone, whether it's stalking or death threats or whatever. How do we assess that? How do we manage that? But of course, they also started to get into the interviewing side. So now I tell a cop, this is probably the kind of person you're looking for. Now the cop picks up that suspect and says, look, how do I interview this guy? I mean, this isn't the same as the guy who's doing a hijacking. So my skills are interviewing hijackers and bank robbers. How do I interview a guy who's cut off the head of his victim, and took it with him, or eviscerated and pulled out the intestines? Like, where do I even start? So you got a lot of involved in guidance with interviews, or helping do the interview, or actually being present and conducting the interview. So you kind of, over the years, it's morphed. And then, of course, you build up a lot of experience on how to solve these weird crimes. So like we used to do back in SAPS, a lot of our work wasn't really who is the kind of person I'm looking for. It was more about, well, we've worked on 100 murder series before. Can we tell you how we caught them previously? This, and this. So it became a lot of investigative guidance on how to solve these cases, because we've worked on hundreds of these cases. The detective who might have the docket might never have worked on one before. So you're bringing that specific investigation experience with these kind of weird crimes.
How is technology impacting profiling?
I'm not too sure. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I still think it's not a technology heavy area, because it's such unique stuff. Technology usually helps, like AI, when you have massive amounts of data that it can mine and apply to your situation. But these are still quite unique and very personalized crimes. So I don't know about technology from a profiling point of view. Technology and law enforcement, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I would imagine, I've been out of the police now almost 10 years. In the 1st of March, it'll be 10 years. I can only imagine how the science of crime scene processing has changed. What we can do now, I hope, is further along than it was 10 years ago. And even when I started the police versus when I left 14 years later, the technology, just our DNA capability was massively improved. And what we could get DNA from compared to when I started in 2000, the sample size was almost, it was minuscule compared to when I started. So definitely technology has changed policing. I don't know if it's really changed profiling. In the world of threat assessment, they are starting to use AI to help at least triage threatening communications. Which ones should we focus on? And that's still very, makes a lot of people nervous, like new technology often does.
Yeah. When is someone officially considered a serial killer? This is one that comes up fairly often. Let's just clear that up for everyone.
Again, because it's not like a diagnosis that you get in the diagnostic manual that's widely used to make diagnoses. There's lots of different definitions, and you have every academic who wants to have his own little thumbprint on a definition. And some of them are really useless. Some of them are very good. And part of this, I mean, some of the definitions used to say you had to have 10 murders before you could call it a serial. Some definitions used to say, 2 murders, but they have to be committed in the United States. And that was definition, obviously, for U.S. law enforcement that had relevance in terms of when federal organizations could get involved. So that was a really silly definition. in terms of applicability outside. And so it depends whether you asked academics who had this academic view of it and law enforcement, which had a very practical view of it. And this led to, in 2004, the FBI holding a symposium in San Antonio, Texas. And I was very, very fortunate to be involved as a representative from SAPS in that. And they called out people from throughout the world, academics, law enforcement, to sit and kind of get some consensus on some general concepts about serial murder. And this is actually a publicly available publication that they produced if you go onto the FBI's website. And one of the things they wanted to look at was, what is the definition because of this discrepancy? And really what it boiled down to is they said 2 separate murders committed by the same person or persons. So that could be 2 intimate partner murders committed by the same person. It would just be an intimate partner serial murder. It could be literally 2 hijacking murders. It's just motivated by something different to what we typically talk about on the show. So they had that serial is 2 or more separate murders, and then you're going to have the different motivations, of which one would be the typical stuff that we are dealing with, which is your sexually motivated, power motivated serial murder. But it could include the hitman who does that for a living, or the black widow woman who marries rich people, kills them, gets the inheritance, marries the next one, kills them, gets the inheritance. So the spectrum of motivations kind of became broader, but the pure concept is 2 separate murders by the same individual.
Fab. Okay, let's go to some of the comments and questions now that we're asking in the chat. From Prof Plum, I mean, we'll always take a compliment. I love this show, gents. You're both legends. Thank you for the level of detail you go into. Not only legends, Prof Plum, but also, I must remind you, we also part of this show is the most gorgeous man in crime. That's Gerard Labuschagne. Don't forget it. All right.
Clearly not in Canada, because I have had 1 date since I've been in Canada in 6 months. So not the most gorgeous man in crime in Canada.
Well, we just put the word out there, Gerard. From Gabe Plays 2, a nice question for you. Who is the most shocking suspect you've caught that you would have never guessed it was him or her?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, obviously, when we start out our cases, typically we have no idea, obviously, who it is, even remotely, because it's a stranger crime. And I would have to say that most of them are never what you thought, and despite having worked on countless cases over the years, seeing the crime scenes, knowing that they're never what you expect, every time I meet one, I was like, I wasn't expecting that. For example, the quarry killer was just really the skinny, scrawny, unassuming, weedy guy, and you just kind of think, really, this is you. So, and I can't say there's one in particular that stands out, but it was always a surprise, and I don't know why. Whenever we catch these guys, it's like, really?
Now I know you have a heart of stone, Gerard, but is there one that you've walked into the room, or you've been conducting an interview and you've just had that deep chill to the bone?
Some people might think I might say Stuart Wilkin Boetie Boer, but I just found him absolutely fascinating. And I'd known all of what he'd done, and it was just really cool to interview him many years later when he was in prison. But the one where I kind of thought, man, this guy could really whip my ass if he wanted to, was in Pindile Nchungwana, the Brighton Beach ex-Blue Bulls rugby player, serial murderer. Probably because he was like, where most of them, as I just said a moment ago, were kind of skinny, weedy, unassuming. He was like, I think he was a forward in the Blue Bulls rugby. I mean, he was freaking huge. I just thought, man, this guy literally, physically, if he just decided he wanted to beat the crap out of me right now, I would hope I'd have to just run as fast as I could and hope my colleagues run slower. I mean, he was handcuffed. So he was the only one where I kind of felt, eesh. I'm trying to think, one that I didn't meet, but I kind of he did give me the thrills in terms of, was he was one of, oh my goodness, what's his name now? Him and a friend of his, we'll call it Gizgay Lover. They gone and committed some murders.
Was this the one in George, or?
Yes. Antoine Vessels, that was his name. And he was been on some documentaries. And he was very much like, I felt this guy would just he would happily just kill you if he just felt like it. I never met him directly, but I've seen interviews. There was a documentary show that came out years ago in South Africa, and they managed somehow to interview him. And he just struck me as one guy that I thought, man, you are like the TV idea of a serial murderer. Just don't give a damn. Whatever you want to do, you'll do. And it involves killing. That's fine.
I think this next question I'm going to put up from Shelley kind of fits nicely here. I'm still stuck on the statement that you made about serial killers leading a normal life between murders and not thinking about their next kill. I don't understand how, if it increases his dopamine. For example, why wouldn't he or she not be thinking about it in their daily thoughts? Like, is the idea of murder brimming constantly at the forefront of these folks' thoughts? And, you know, you talk about the guy that you said if he decided he could suddenly turn on you, you think, and kill you at will.
Yeah, look, so I don't necessarily think that they wouldn't be thinking about it, but they carry on with their normal lives. And I'm sure, and it will build up as they kind of, for whatever reasons, feel that urge arising. It would be more prominent in their thoughts. And that probably is a cyclic influence on thinking about it, arousal, thinking about it, arousal. So I don't think it's a case they don't think about it at all. And then one day they just wake up, time to kill. But they kind of just fall back in their normal routine of life, doing whatever they do, their job, their relationships, you know, drinking, carrying on, whatever. And it will start to creep more and more back into their sort of prominence in their conscience about, I now need to go and do this again. So I wouldn't say, if it was perhaps communicated that they don't think about it all in between the murders. I don't think that's the case. But I do think it's a lull in it, and it'll pick up as it starts to get closer and closer to the next murder, and they go out and do it.
Why is it that these folks tend to be such model prisoners? You know, once you take them out of society, that these behaviors seem to be pretty manageable.
It's the thing is, in general, they're not living a violent crime lifestyle, so they're not interested in robbing, cheating, stealing. I mean, sure. I'm pretty much sure there must be one or two that were just bad people in general and also were killing. But the majority of them are just kind of like living this normal lifestyle. It's as if their violent thoughts and acts are so compartmentalized. And that's why people often say they can't believe it's that person, because they're living this absolutely normal life. So they just have, for whatever reasons we don't yet understand, this desire that builds up to go out and then kill, rape and kill, etc. But for the rest of it, so in prison, they tend to be normal prisoners because they just aren't generally violent prisoners. They're not the kind of person who sees violence as a solution to all of their problems. Now, there was one guy who was like that, and he was convicted in Cape Town, and he was a young guy whose dad was big in one of the local gangs in Cape Town. And I don't know, I can't remember how old he was, and I don't know with the new law whether we can say his name, but he's been featured on one or two documentaries. I think we've spoken about it before even. And he was one of the few that just would, you irritated him, he would assault you. If you really irritated him, he would just kill you. If he asked you a question and you didn't answer it the way he felt was respectful, he would do something to you. Now, that guy was probably the closest to what we maybe think serial murders are. And in prison, I would imagine he would continue with that behavior, because that was just part of his way of interacting with the world. Is violence is my solution. Domination of another human being is my way of living. Whereas most serial murderers, they don't have that. So in prison, model prisoners typically, it's because they just don't really have this violent attitude.
Absolutely. Guys, we are inviting your questions tonight. So whatever questions you've always wanted to pose to Gerard, please do pop them in the group and we'll get to as many as we can. Some of them I think we're answering as we go as well. So do listen out if your question kind of gets answered as we go, then I will kind of skip over it. I did just want to say that if you'd like to become a member of the channel, please do hit subscribe. It does, of course, help us just to, generate more commercial interest in the channel and hopefully make this a more sustainable thing. So hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and the bell. If you press that one, it'll remind you or it'll let you know when we post new content. This week, we will, of course, be posting our next episode of the series Murder on the Mind, which is where psychologists deep dive into individual cases. So very much looking at the psychology of different killers and different crimes. So look out for this week's episode coming up later in the week. Now we're going to go to a question from Melissa Heartland 1234 about a case which I know you've had some involvement involvement in because you actually interviewed this guy. And that is the case of Sifiso Mkhwanazi. I always wondered what drove Sifiso Mkhwanazi, who murdered 6 women and hid them at his father's panel repair shop. I also am amazed at how it took so long to discover all of these unfortunately decaying bodies littered around this warehouse.
Yeah. So Sifiso, interesting, just for the backstory to that, I'd been asked by legal aid, firstly, just for my general opinion about the case. He was planning on pleading guilty and they wanted to just get my thoughts on a few things. And I said, sure. So I obviously went through the whole docket. And then I said, well, if you want me to interview him, I'm happy to go interview him. So I went to interview Sifiso. Basically what he said to me is that, he had this, what he calls a false allegation of rape that a sex worker had opened up against him at the police station. And that led to him being in prison for, I think, about 9 months. And then eventually the case was withdrawn. And then after that, we had the sex worker murders. And he said to me that when he picked up a lady for sex and brought her back to the workshop, if she was going to argue with him about money or make threats, like the previous lady had done, who got him falsely, in his version, falsely arrested, then he would kill them. But if they didn't argue with him and the transaction went as per normal, he paid them, the sex took place, he would let them live. So his verbalization was, I guess, one of revenge, that revenge for what happened to him, revenge if you want to try and do this to me again, you, new sex worker that I've met before, you want to make a false allegation against me, I'm going to not allow that and I'm going to kill you. Again, that's the person's explanation. But I'm sure there have been lots of people who have been falsely accused by sex workers, put in jail, but they're not killing people. So that's his verbalization. He might really believe that. But why him? Why did he react with the thought of, I'm going to kill people, as opposed to, I'm going to not pick up sex workers, or whatever his multitude of options could have been to deal with those situations?
And me and you actually headed along to the courts to when he was being sentenced. Yes, so that's actually my very first serial killer that I've kind of been in the immediate presence of. So that was an interesting one. An interesting one about this case that I find fascinating. Now, you might have, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you might over the years we've mentioned a book that Gerard found, written by a man by the name of Colonel Ulf Boberg. It's called The Boberg Story. Yeah. Now, in the Boberg story, they reference what I think, I don't know, Gerard, you're the academic here, if there's an earlier serial killer case that you are aware of. But essentially referenced in the book there is the story of a killer called the Man in the Black Car. And what I find, and there's a little excerpt here that I'm just going to bring up, where they talk about this guy. So this is just an excerpt. Meanwhile, she managed to tell me with great difficulty and between spluttering and coughing that a man in a big black car had picked her up on her beat. So this is Boberg reporting, writing about what essentially a lady of the night who had been picked up by this killer and survived the ordeal. Once she got into his car, she became afraid of him. There was something about him she did not like, and she had a feeling that he meant her harm. She'd insisted on being put down, but he had refused and driven fast out of the Potchefstroom Road. In the car, she had edged away from him in the seat and had prepared herself to fight for her life if necessary. Suddenly, he'd stopped the car, and as he had leant over towards her, she had given him a violent push and tried to open the door and get out. He had caught her by the throat and pressed until everything went black before her. Of the rest, she did not know what had happened until she found herself lying in the road, and the detectives had found her. The reason I just bring this up, because I find there's like this fascinating parallel, because that case happened in exactly the same area of the city, essentially, where Sifiso Mkhwanazi was conducting his crimes. And I've always thought that what we should do is, kind of a comparison and discuss, because, you got two very similar murders with quite a similar modus operandi, seems to be quite a similar victim type, but happening in two very distinct historical periods in the city, and when the cultural and social realities are vastly different. So
and that was in the, I think, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, 1920s. Was it later? Was it in the 30s?
I don't know. I think the Man in the Black Car is the 40s actually, but yeah, his book spans the period, his career from the 20s up to the 50s, where eventually he was the kind of most senior detective in the country, and just a fascinating read if you can get your hands on it.
Hold of it, you can only get them like at second stores. I bought like 5 copies, and it's actually available in Afrikaans and English for those of you that wonder if it in Afrikaans. But what's interesting about that particular case is that his motivation was a sex worker gave me, I think, syphilis or something. Not me, him. Gave him syphilis. And that was his motive for going out and killing this victim, which is exactly what the Quarry serial killer did. You can perhaps say it's similar to the revenge of, like mentioned here, Sithole. You know, women have done something to me. I'm going to get back at them. That sense of revenge from some other romantic or sexual interaction they had with someone. So...
So I just encourage you guys to track down that story. Sorry, I was just reading some questions there. All right, so I also imagine that the Boberg story, I see it as like a Netflix drama, you know, like a really cool
I wish
telling of that story in that period. Because I love the way he talks about investigating cases. Like literally he'll be in Cape Town and then he'll go and interview someone in the city and then he's following the lead. He's on a train up to Bloemfontein. And so it's like, you know, you really get a sense of the nature of investigation in a different era as well, whether you didn't have all of the technology and immediate access to communications and stuff.
And how it really does boil down to having that good detective. And I mean, he was just phenomenal detective mindset.
Absolutely.
And creativity and thinking, problem solving. You know, the world's best technology. If you don't have that, you're not going to go anywhere. So that's why I found that book absolutely fascinating. And it spans from fraud to serial murder cases to, you know, a sailor who's coming, or a person in World War II whose ship stops in Durban, and for the day he goes and kills someone. He's about to leave again, and how they catch this guy before he gets back on the transport ship. This is phenomenal.
No, absolutely. And they actually cover some of the really big noteworthy cases. The one jewel heist, the Oppenheimer jewels heist is covered in the book as well. Just fascinating. If you can get your hands in it, can't help but recommend it. You'll probably have to be, you know, it's one of those ones to look out for in secondhand bookstores and to dig for on the kind of eBays of the world. Who is South Africa's youngest serial killer?
So again, that was a guy, and I think, Paul, we've done an episode at some point on this kid. Again, with the laws changing, I don't know if we're allowed to mention his name, although his name, I don't know. But this was in Vredendal in the Western Cape. And it's a little sort of wine farming community amongst other things. And this guy was he about 16, 15 when he committed his first rape murder?
14.
He'd been sent 14, and he's sent to prison, or school, what do you call it, reform school, where they allow you home for the holidays. And anyway, he's home for one of the holidays, and he ends up, was it first he raped and attempted murder of another person just before he turned 18. And then just after he turned 18 in that same December holiday, he then raped and killed another woman. So he's the youngest guy that I know of that's confirmed, you know, the correct number of kills, etc. And, you know, didn't stop even though we'd been caught off the first one.
Well, we might want to mention kind of what our latest understanding is of this particular case as well, because it's also a good it's a good example of where some of the challenges really lie when it comes to sentencing and rehabilitation, and how we track and monitor these types of people throughout life once they've been identified at this kind of young age to commit these kinds of crimes. Because the last that we heard of this case, Gerard, is that he is currently arrested again for another murder that he committed in 2024. And we should actually see if there's been any progress on that case.
That's true. And I mean, he got it. I think actually I was very angry, if I recall correctly. He wasn't, the charge that they charged him with, if this is the right case, wasn't even murder. It was culpable homicide for the second. Like, how do you culpable homicide someone that you've beaten and stabbed to death? Anyway, but he got a very paltry sentence. And clearly, as you quite reminded me, I'd totally forgotten. He's clearly out. And
it was a 6-year sentence. It was a 6-year sentence for murder and rape.
It was absolutely shocking.
Yeah, and he was released in 2018 and went on to commit an offense again. So just that, goes to show that, these types of personalities, there needs to be a system in place to kind of keep a check on them, even if especially in South Africa, where there isn't a life without parole sentence, and a lot of these types of offenders will very possibly be back on our streets once they've gone through the parole system. There was a question, sorry, I wanted to ask a little bit, Trudy, it's not this one. What are the most common misconceptions about profiling portrayed in TV and film? And I think we can broaden that out. What are some of the most kind of, have there been things that you've seen in movies and films where you've gone, wow, that's really not hitting the mark?
So to be honest with you, the what you see on TV often is that the profile is like the head of the investigation. They're leading it. They're in charge of it. The reality is no. Ironically, in South Africa, the South African investigative psychology section probably works the closest to what you see on TV, because we are intimately involved in the whole investigation. And there have been cases where it's not the ideal, where we have taken over the investigation, like the Quarry murder series, and a few others that have occurred over the years where myself or Yanni, again, it was not our intention, but just happened that we took over the running of the investigation, where normally we are going to be part of the task team, obviously giving, a lot of our advice. But we would find that if you had a really experienced team of detectives, like some old murder and robbery detectives or serious violent crime detectives who had been trained by us, we would just play like a very light guiding hand. But the less experienced the detective was, we would play a more involved role in guiding it. But typically your profiler is working in the back scenes. They are advising. They're not in the forefront. And in a lot of cases in certain countries, they're not even allowed onto the crime scene. They're not allowed to interview the suspect directly. They might be able to watch from behind a one-way mirror. Whereas because we were, again, law enforcement, we were employed in terms of the Police Act, and just how our structure worked, we could literally be involved in everything from being present during the arrest, during the interview, at the crime scene, et cetera, where a lot of profilers don't have that access. So even the FBI profilers, firstly, they can't force themselves into an investigation. Usually they have to be invited by the local police, and they are there at the blessing and invitation of the local police, and kind of can only do what the local police will let them do. And they're often typically therefore not on the crime scene because they're called in afterwards. So the FBI guys don't typically aren't present at the crime scene in many instances. So I think the biggest misconception is the role that the profiler is the lead of the investigation. That's probably the biggest one that is incorrect. And also that it is based on this sort of almost psychic-like gut feeling. And honestly, if the real law enforcement profilers, if you even imply that you pick up vibes on a crime scene, you're going to be totally pushed aside and ignored by the genuine law enforcement profiling community. They don't tolerate that crap because it just creates such a bad impression of what they do, that they've been fighting against, to be seen as professionals that have a lot of valuable evidence-based, work-based experience that can contribute, as opposed to these airy-fairy people who have dreams at night and think they can connect with the murderer.
And it's not so much this kind of Sherlock Holmes thing either, of kind of going in and spotting all of the idiosyncrasies and all of the, as you scan the room. I mean, there's a part of that, but I mean, I guess you're more going to assess the scene, figure out all the bits and pieces, and compile a report. You're not just going to start throwing out.
Yeah, and we often say that your gut instinct is usually your experience telling you, hey, hello, and you're not realizing. So you gut thinking, okay, there's something not right here. But usually when you sit down, you can figure out, because that now is out of place, and this is not typical of what we see. So gut instinct can often just be your experience telling you something before you've woken up and realized what it's telling you. But if your gut instinct is, well, I just feel he's a 25-year-old man. My gut instinct that there's two people here. Why? I can't say. Well, that's just bullshit. But if your gut instinct go, well, because there's this and there's that and there's that and there's that, you have to be able to rationalize it from your previous experience, or maybe there's research about that particular aspect. Yeah. So gut is it's not your sixth sense. It's just your work experience telling you something's out of order. You just haven't clicked on what it was, and then you can usually relate that back to your experience, your something factual as opposed to something not
I
factual.
want to bring this back quickly just to kind of underline some things for our South African viewers in particular. And, just generally those folks who are kind of interested in the state of law enforcement and how it can be more efficient and effective. And what you were talking about a little earlier, the fact that we have one police service for the whole country, and that in order to be a profiler on a crime scene, you really have to be the forensic psychologist. You need to be a police officer as well. You're not like in other countries, like in the States, for example, you would come on essentially as a freelance hired consultant by law enforcement. And the fact that we've had this centralized national police service seems to be the best way, the most efficient system to have in place to do law enforcement well, which is an indictment on the fact that our law enforcement system is going through such difficulties and has been kind of handicapped to the point that it has. And where this question is going, Gerard, is what are some of those complications that have arisen in the last 20 years now that not only have disadvantaged or handicapped the police system here in South Africa and potentially contributed to some of the factors why you left SAPS? And maybe you can talk a little bit about some of your motivations for leaving ultimately.
Yeah, look, in a nutshell, I mean, in South Africa, we only know the South African Police Service. So from that local police station in Pofadder to the Hawks to head office, it's all one law enforcement agency. It's just divided up for management purposes, obviously. But if you're a constable in Pofadder and you go down to Cape Town for work, you're still a constable. You still have jurisdiction. You must understand, contrast this with the United States, where you have 17,000 independent law enforcement agencies. So it would be like, for example, Cape Town Central Police Station is its own police station. It's its own police force. It's funded by the taxpayers in Central Cape Town. Its uniform looks different. It has its own policies and procedures. It's everything. And as soon as that policeman moved out of Cape Town's jurisdiction into Wynberg, he wouldn't be a policeman anymore. He wouldn't have jurisdiction unless he's chasing a suspect. So imagine how that would work. I mean, so each one has its own rules, regulations. They can hire who they want. If they want to get an external consultant, they can get an external consultant. That also means that when a lot of like federal law enforcement agencies profilers leave their federal jobs, go on retirement, there's a lot of potential clients, in other words, police stations or police agencies, that they can go and market their services to either for training or for consulting on cases. In South Africa, we just have the South African Police Service. So once you're kind of out of it, like when I left, I knew I would never get work from the South African Police Service as a profiler, because they had the unit there. They had, Colonel Meyerberg, Colonel Dabanga, Colonel Buthelezi, Colonel Sekolea, etc., all the other people that still remained behind. So now that's the one aspect of it. So it also means that communicating across borders in America is a lot more difficult. You can have a murder in this jurisdiction and one in the next jurisdiction, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. They're not sitting around the same forum chatting about crimes in their various police agency areas. There's not a national database for DNA in America. You can send it to CODIS, but that's a voluntary federal DNA database, which you can or you don't have to send your DNA to. South Africa, because we have one national police service, there's no border issue, so I could work in any part of the country. I had as a brigadier, I was a brigadier. I outranked, most of the people that I'd be going to assist in a case. I was still that, had my authority, etc. We had essentially one DNA database to use, one fingerprint database to use. So that setup is great for serials because you stand a bigger chance of picking up linkages because we're only using one database. Whereas this little in America, this little towns will send its DNA to probably the lab that gave them the cheapest quotation to process their DNA. It's not going on a bigger database. So that's helpful in terms of serial crime investigation, absolutely. It also makes it a very big, lumpy organization. It often doesn't change very quickly, which, things when it affects everything, but when you're struggling to get change, that can be a bit of a problem.
But it has changed. And what has changed? It seems like when you started in law enforcement, you were excited and positive about affecting positive change in the organization. Yeah. But from what I gather, it went the other way.
Yeah, look, I started in 2001, and I think it was still back in 2001 a very, very good law enforcement agency with really great people, great skills. But I think there's been an attrition of those people and skills through to retirement, early retirement, people just leaving because they just got frustrated with whatever it is, from promotions to whatever. And unfortunately, mismanagement crept in, and it's just not what it was back in 2001, and very sadly so. And I think most cops who are, say, my age, I'm 54, sadly, that I speak to, my colleagues think they just want to get out. If they can get an early retirement, they'll take it, and they're miserable. And that's very sad. And I think it's just purely mismanagement. So yes, there are some still really great people who are still there, of course, but they are definitely becoming the minority. And unfortunately, when your management is not great, it doesn't matter whether you've got great people, because management is making bad decisions. And now we went from having, DNA labs that were running and functioning very great and having turnaround times down to 6 weeks. I think we're back to this period where we're having 6 months or longer for DNA turnaround times. So because they're not ordering the chemicals, which they should have known are going to run out 6 months ago, and you should have applied. And people, as Shelley Foote comments, there are a lot of people, great people. And this is not just a race issue, who have been overseen for promotion. I knew phenomenal investigators who met all of our affirmative action and equity requirements, black females, black males, who are phenomenal in their job, who also weren't getting promoted. And very often it's difficult to overlook about the fact that it seemed like a little bit of nepotism, favoritism was taking place, and not great people were being promoted, where you had phenomenal candidates who did meet the necessary requirements in terms of our equity requirements, who also weren't getting promoted. So I think it was just, it's just, it's disheartening.
That said, I mean, it doesn't mean that people weren't being promoted. It seems like there's that statistic you raised that there are more generals in SAPS now than there were in the combined Allied forces at the height of World War II or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've just gone up where we had a handful of generals back in the sort of 80s that literally a handful. Where you have now police stations, some of them have been run by a general. That's just bizarre. So we've kind of inflated the top management structure, phenomenally inflated it, with people who get paid a fat, huge salary, doing jobs that were done 20 years ago by a captain at the most. That's just not helpful.
And that just adds to a big salary bill, guys. So the salary bill next to, I think, the bill for executive protection, I think that's another one of the main chunks of police budget every year. So tells a lot, just those two.
On that, the last comment on that is also just corruption. We've always had corruption. Every law enforcement has it to some degree. I mean, in Canada, about 2 weeks ago in Ontario, they arrested 7 cops for corruption, for being pally-pally with organized crime. So it happens everywhere. But it just seems like corruption on so many levels, from street corruption, like you pull someone over drunk driving and he pays you $100 and you let him go, to corruption in tendering, to corruption in appointments, to corruption. It's just like it's become permeated. And unfortunately, when your corrupt people become more than your non-corrupt, it suddenly goes even faster, because your good people don't speak out anymore because of risk of what that's going to happen to you. Where it used to be 30 years ago, the corrupt people had to be in the shadows. Now, no more do the corrupt people have to be in the shadows and speaking out against it. We've seen what happens to whistleblowers in South Africa. It's just not in your interest. You just keep your head down. And if you know your colleague next to you is doing corrupt stuff, it's like, you know what? It's none of my business. I'm doing my job. I'm going to keep this on. Yeah. And you can understand why cops are doing that, because it's just, you're not doing yourself favors by speaking out against it.
And over the years, I've had one or two people kind of mention to me the fact that, it's been a long time now that, criminal organizations have been putting their members through the police service. So who knows what folks have kind of been embedded into the police over the years. It's something worth thinking about as well. But none of it very good, and there doesn't seem to be a very good trajectory that we're on even now. But at least talking about these things and raising awareness maybe can help a little bit in this little in our little corner of the world. Gerard, it's been an hour now. I'm gonna just go through some quick fires, okay? And so you're not allowed to khan on. The nice little short answers, okay? Are you ready? We're gonna see and get through as many as we can here. So first of all, Moon Dancer, are you directly face to face with them when you interview them, i.e. no screen between you and unshackled?
Yeah, we don't have screens like you see on TV. So you're in the same room. That room could be anything from the detective's office to whatever room is available, a boardroom in a police station that happened to be available. It's really kind of varied. Shackled? Not always, to be honest with you. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. Mkhwanazi, the guy that I said I was really worried about, he was leg ironed just because, he was very big and dangerous. But no, typically it's like when I interviewed Buti Boer. I mean, we're just sitting in a room in the prison. He wasn't, and generally you don't have to interfere from these guys because you're not their target audience for their victim. So, no. So the question is, no, we're not sitting behind fancy things and one-way mirrors.
And maybe quite a welcome audience for these types of personalities as well. How many people do you think the killers of the Uber driver have killed? They were so chill in the video. Have you seen that? Are you aware of that?
I have not. So I saw the comment earlier and I wasn't quite aware of what's
all right, Shelley will bank that one. From Gay Place 2, have you ever been on a date and your profiler instincts have brought red flags of the person?
When you go on a date, we're all profiling when we go on a date. We're trying to see, are there signs of this person being crazy or being not my type? So we all profile all the time as human nature. So I don't know whether it's per se my profiler skills. Like, I mean, let me think. So I became a profiler. I definitely have been on some dates. I couldn't say it's profiler skills. I think it's the stuff that we all just do when we're sussing out people, to see whether this is a partner or a friend that we want to be friends with this person or not.
Okay. From Fairy Dust 88, what is the most interesting thing you've learned about human behavior through your work?
Sure. That's a good question. I'm just going to think about that for a long time. That I think that the interesting thing is that I think there's still a lot more good people out there who just want to be good and decent and live decent lives. The other thing perhaps is I'm never surprised that someone could or couldn't have committed a crime. You just never know.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you use the DISC personality test to do assessments? T. Breitenbach asks. The DISC.
No, I don't. And I'm so embarrassed to say I don't know what the DISC personality test is.
Carmen Starbuck, have you ever interviewed someone and realized that they were actually studying you and your behaviors just as much as you were studying them? Have you ever been part of that movie, the face-off, the intellectual jousting with a murderer?
I've never had it like, in the Silence of the Lambs where, what's his name, asks Jodie Foster some memory about her past. I've never had that where they've started to ask me personal questions and I wouldn't answer personal questions. But we always said that every interview is a give and take. You are given as much information as you're getting. So how you ask questions is telling that person what you know. So we're always cognizant of how we ask questions, that the other person is also looking for information in any interview. It's always like that. It's never a one-way street. But I never felt like I was being studied. Maybe I was, but it's a two-way street with information for sure.
That said, I gather one thing that you can take from a lot of true crime content is that these types of personalities are trying to retain things like control and trying to find ways to get some of the things that they find satisfying in normal life, like power and control, for example.
Yep.
Is the Atwatwa killer a spree killer? Maybe you could just quickly give us the breakdown of what is the difference between a spree killer, a serial killer, and what's the one I'm missing, and a mass murderer. Spree, serial spree versus mass. Go.
So as I said, serial is, according to the FBI definition, 2 or more separate murders committed by the same person. Doesn't matter what the motive is. That's the basic definition of serial. Spree, or let's go to mass first. Mass is one incident, one location, one event, like going into a school or going into a concert or going into a workplace and killing a bunch of people. What that number is, 2, 3, 4, can be a bit varied, but it's one event, one incident, one location. Spree is kind of like with this movement. And this is kind of ones where it gets a bit difficult because you can have a guy like the Postmasburg guy who shot some people in the police station. Then he walked up the road to the petrol station, shot somebody. And as he was walking around, just shooting people, jumped in his car and drove out the town. So you have movement. So it's not quite a mass. If he'd killed everybody just in the police station, we would have said it's a mass. Some spree killers can also be over a couple of weeks as they travel around. what was those that couple in South Africa that they referred to as the Bonnie and Clyde? Oh my goodness, they released her from prison. He was executed. Ugh. Anyway, but over like 2 or 3 weeks, they committed murders in Durban, Melmoth, Secunda. So that could be regarded as a spree. So spree gets a bit more challenging because how short can it be? How long could it be? If you're a truck driver who travels between Cape Town and Johannesburg, and over your years of driving that route, you've killed people, are you a spree or are you just a serial who just traveled? So that's why spree can sometimes be a bit more complicated in determining when is it a spree and when is it actually a serial who just moves around a lot.
Were you thinking of Charmaine Phillips and Peter Grundling?
Peter Grundling, there we go, that's it.
There we go. Which also brings up, kind of leads us into another question, because there's another Bonnie and Clyde type situation, and that would be Thabo Bester. Did you interview Thabo Bester?
Oh, yeah.
Has your profile accused changed?
So the first answer question,
yes.
Melissa, yes. In fact, there was a documentary released, was it last year? I can't remember what it was called. And in that, you'll see Thabo Bester. If you see any interview of Thabo Bester being interviewed, that's my interview with Thabo Bester. So I know News 24 included it somewhere, and on YouTube you'll probably find it. So it's basically a headshot of him. You'll hear me talk in the background, and once or twice you'll hear my colleague, depending how long the section of the interview is, A.J. Lutchman, who's a detective from Hawks. So that's my interview that I did with Thabo. I spent about 2.5 hours. So the News 24 had the last 15 minutes of it. And the interview that came out had actually a full or portions from the full interview that I'd done with Thabo Bester. Yes.
Great. We'll just get a couple more, Gerard. I'm going to hang on to you for a couple more minutes. Okay. You must have got serious PTSD from seeing all those dead bodies and murderers. Did you get any therapy?
So I wouldn't say I had PTSD in the classic sense that I would have flashbacks and nightmares, etc. I mean, it does impact upon you, but I felt always it was more the continual workload, just the pressure on you all the time. You can never get through all of your work, and then there's new cases coming in that you have to deal with, and you're still trying to finish up old cases. So it was me more like I was under a lot of pressure that made me irritable and snappy, and I think my ex-wife can attest to the fact that I was often just would get in a shitty mood for like 2 days, which was never great. So I wouldn't call it classical PTSD in that sense, but definitely the impact on making me very in a bad mood a lot of the time, short-tempered, etc.
Do you ever?
No, I didn't go for therapy.
Do you ever wonder why? Do you ever question why you're able to kind of box things a little bit? You know, clearly you can better than some people.
I think some people just have the inherent personality that they can deal with. I mean, you can argue the same thing about crime scene people. They see probably on a more regular basis more horrific things than I ever saw.
Oh yeah,
because they go to accident, they go to any kind of violent death.
Yeah, emergency folks, man.
Yeah, EMS people, forensic pathologists, the uniformed guys who arrive on the scene. I mean, they all have been exposed to, on a more repeated basis, more horrific things than probably I have. So I think there's certain personalities that just cope and have whatever reasons, a resilience for that kind of stuff. I think what helped me is I always was fascinated by human behavior, and violent crime is an example of human behavior. So when I went to see something of a person whose head's chopped off and their intestines ripped out, it's like, oh, I haven't seen that before. That's interesting. Wonder why someone will do that. Let's try and catch them and find out. So I saw it as part of a bigger fascination with human behavior, but also I saw it as part of a bigger process to bring to justice the person who committed that act.
When do you think things started going downhill? When the specialized units were closed down? That was a bad move by Salibi. I still wonder what his real motivation was. I just want to point out, we did an interview with Tolly Vreugdenburg. You can go back and watch that. And I did ask him this question. But Gerard, just your comments before we wrap up on that one.
Yeah, thanks, my favorite Gillian Dugubeya. So I think 2006 was a big turning point when Jackie Salibi closed down the serious violent crime units. He closed down a whole bunch of the sexual offenses, the FCS units. Some of them have been reopened up again. I think that was the biggest, one of the most negative things that has happened to the South African police service, and we don't think we ever recovered from that. I think his motive was probably because, as we know later on, he was involved with with the mafia, and he was convicted for that, his role in being involved in the mafia. Gerard was a prosecutor. So I do think that you can't say that had nothing to do with it. It wasn't just a good management decision, because I don't think any cops would tell him that this is going to be a good idea. So that was the biggest impact. And then I just think it was, like I said, just appointing people into positions that they weren't ready to manage. And as the minute you have that, everything else collapses underneath. So those were the two biggest things. And that bad management allows corruption to flourish underneath it.
Yeah, if you want to commit fraudulent behavior, you can't just shut down the anti-fraud unit, because that's kind of obvious. You got to come up with a blanket reason to do it, sending all the cops back to the... Oh, have we lost me?
Yeah. I can hear you. I'll just kind of also saying one of the biggest impact of that, of closing down, is that a lot of your left and were snapped up by private companies who were looking for investigators. Like the banks snapped up so many serious and violent crime detectives. So that for me really, really stripped the police of these fantastic, phenomenal detectives. Just weren't in the police anymore. So even when they did start to bring back things like the sexual offenses units, a lot of those detectives obviously weren't marketable outside, because you don't get sexual offenses detective investigators in private companies. So I think that was a big problem there. So, but you lost your old murder and robbery stroke serious and violent crime detectives left after 2006 for bigger salaries at private companies like banks and big companies and corporates. And even if you want to reopen something similar, who is going to be the people to staff that? And that was really a training ground for your future detectives in serious and violent crime stuff, was those units. So we really just didn't do ourselves any favors. And now I have no idea whether I'm just talking to myself or whether you guys still hear me. Somebody post in the chat.
Gerard, I am still here, Gerard.
Okay.
It's just that
worried.
My camera has gone dead, so we'll probably just wrap things up like this, if that's okay. So many good questions, Lauren said, being asked here. I wonder if we'll get answers. I hope, Lauren. I think we've gotten through most of them. Dr. Labuschagne, you're proof that a man can spend his life hunting monsters and still come out the other side as a total gentleman.
Thanks,
lovely. Guys, I'm sorry that I've disappeared, but... Gerard, thank you so much for the chat, as always. I'm going to, I'm just trying to see if I can figure out how to get myself back here. Just give me one.
Seems like we should do more of these, because we had a whole bunch of listener questions that we pulled out over the years, and I don't even think we got into like 5 of them. And of course, everybody on the chat had really great questions. So yeah, maybe we should do one of these more regularly.
I'm just trying to see. Nope, I'm not having any luck getting myself to come back. Sorry about this, guys.
Thanks, Moon Dancer.
Yes, we hear you had a great detectives evening as they. All right, guys. So thank you so much for tonight, Gerard. Maybe I'm going to hand over to you, and you can tonight wrap up the episode and thank everyone and remind everyone to hit subscribe and everything, and say goodnight on both of our behalf.
Well, thank you. I mean, obviously we have some of our amazing regulars who are always contributing and giving us support. And of course, a few new names that I don't recognize. And we always like that. New names are always fantastic. And thank you, because it really is, if you guys weren't here, we wouldn't be able to be here. And the questions are great. Like I said, I think we should really try and do something like this more frequently, because I think there's so many things people just want to ask that you can't always fit or aren't relevant to the show you're talking about on a particular day about a particular case. So thanks, everybody. As Paul said, like, subscribe, and do all those other things you always hear whenever you watch a YouTube channel, because that really does just give us the motivation to continue, but also sometimes the financial help to continue. And Paul and I don't physically get any money in our pockets out of this. So so far, this has just been covering some basic expenses. And thank you, everybody, and see you next week.
And trust nobody. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Trust nobody.
This was a great episode, man. Except, and even better, because like people don't have to look at me now right at the end. They just get to see, that handsome face. There it is, the most gorgeous man in crime.
Well, you've just been described as the wizard behind the scenes by Melissa. So,
thank you, Melissa. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Good night. See you next week.
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free, or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember, trust nobody.